We live. Hey, friends, this is Dan Burke. You're watching Behind the Scenes Divine Intimacy Radio. We're going to be jumping into an interesting show on exorcism and the Pope's Exorcist, a new book out by Sophia Press, 101 Questions about Father Gabriele Amorth. So before we get to the show, I want to tell you about our Avila Summit coming up in 2023. It's called The Marian Mystery and the Triumph of the Immaculate Heart, October 13th to the 15th. And we're pretty excited about the crew that's going to be speaking there. Bishop Liam Carey, Claire Dwyer, Father John Burns, Father Ignatius Schweitzer, Sister Regina Marie Gorman, Dr. Mark Marivalli. Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Hansville. If you have a deep devotion to the Blessed Virgin, and you want to learn more and you want to be around people who are on fire and holy and get lit up and strengthened in your faith, SpiritualDirection.com /events. Does that link actually work? Have you checked that? Because I tried it one time and it didn't take us to the page. Maybe there was something wrong with my system. So SpiritualDirection.com /events. I'm asking the lady in charge of such things. And you'll find all of our events there. SpiritualDirection.com /events. I also want to tell you about a series I just finished recently on mental prayer that's meant for personal use, small groups, or parish use. You can find out that it's free. It cost us a lot, but it was free. We want to make it free because we want people to know Jesus in a deeper way. And you can find out about that at SpiritualDirection.com /prayer, PRAYER, and sign up for that. So always wanting to give you guys opportunities to grow in the interior life. And so we're going to jump into the show. Are you ready?
Yep.
Ready, mark it, set, go. This is Dan and Jordan Burke. Welcome to Divine Intimacy Radio, your radio haven of rest.
Your monastery of the mind.
No, you totally messed that up.
I figured I was
okay,
going to.
So
every time. This is going to be a reoccurring theme every time I'm on.
He's not the normal co-host.
Yeah.
Stephanie Burke is the normal co-host. So I say
Radio Haven of Rest.
Your Hermitage of the Heart
Hermitage
is what you say.
Heart,
okay, you want to try it again?
Sure.
Hey, friends, this is Dan and Jordan Burke. Welcome to Divine Intimacy Radio, your radio haven of rest.
Your Hermitage of the Heart.
Your monastery of the mind, where we lift our hearts and minds to heaven to draw on the wisdom of the saints to help us to navigate the tumult of this life. You just didn't say it with all that much conviction. You said it almost like with a question mark.
It felt strange in my head. Okay. So I was navigating how to say it.
All right. Well, Jordan's on the show today because he is actually representing a book for Sophia Press that I wanted to talk about it. And we only have 2 mics in the studio, but he's going to fix that. I've
eventually.
Yeah. Eventually. So, and the book is The Pope's Exorcist, 101 Questions about Father Gabriele Amorth. Jordan was chosen as the spokesperson because he's good at it and because he's, I think, read every book in print on exorcism and this topic. And in fact, we have 3 other books sitting here in the studio by Sophia Press on Father Amorth. Why don't you name them off?
Yeah, so Father Amorth, My Battle Against Satan, An Exorcist Explains the Demonic, and The Devil is Afraid of Me. And I think they may have another one. I just couldn't find it on my shelf in time. Right. But those are all Sophia Press, and they're all by Father Gabriele Amorth.
Great books. And Jordan, if you didn't know Jordan, I mean, obviously our relationship, everybody knows, but he has a great apostolate called Do the Harder Thing, which is part of our work here. And he also works here every day. He has many jobs. Digital media specialist, and he works in outreach through Instagram and all kinds of stuff like that.
And occult research now.
And occult research, right? Exactly. It's actually, it's becoming a big issue.
Yeah.
So who was this guy, Father Gabriele Amorth, this exorcist of many? Tell me about him.
So Father Gabriele Amorth was an exorcist in Rome for a number of years, but what's fascinating about his life is that he started feeling the call to the priesthood. I think it was about 12 years old, but he didn't become ordained until he was 32. Mm-hmm. Prior to becoming ordained, he was involved in politics. He fought for the resistance in World War II. And then he actually helped the Italian prime minister at the time write their constitution. So he had a hand at forming the Italian
So
constitution.
he's a crummy student, but a bright guy.
Right. Right.
Did I read that right? That he was a bad student?
So he was a bad student, but which is interesting because he was a phenomenal teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so he taught a lot, he spoke a lot, he wrote a lot. Obviously, there's just some of his books here. But he became ordained at 32 years old. But what's really fascinating about the path that his life kind of took is that he didn't become an exorcist until he was in his 60s. So he's a priest from 32 to, like, let's just say 60.
Yeah.
Then he becomes an exorcist. He passes in 2016 at the age of 91. So he's very recent as well.
Mm-hmm.
But from 60s to, kind of up until before he passed, he was performing exorcisms full time. But he's also an amazing figure because Padre Pio was a spiritual director, which a lot of people don't know, which is really interesting. And he helped form the IAE, which is the International Association of Exorcists.
Mm-hmm.
He had a real strong heart and desire to help liberate people, and he saw the need clearly. And what he wanted to do was pass on the information that he was gaining from as many exorcisms. I'll just say it. He performed up to 60,000 exorcisms.
Crazy.
Over the course of that short period of time.
Wow. That's every day, all day.
Yeah. Much. Well, he was seeing upwards of 17 people, I think, a day at one point, and then he lessened it.
I think I unknowingly walked through the waiting room in Rome.
Yeah, possibly.
In 2007. I was on honeymoon with Stephanie, and at the top of Scala Santa, which is right across from St. John Lateran in Rome, and which is the Basilica of Rome, or the seat of the Bishop of Rome. Sure. A lot of people think it's St. Peter's, but it's not. And at the top of the stairs, there was a waiting room, and I thought, this is weird because it's like a holy place. Scala Santa is the stairs that who was the big Constantine's mother, Helen, brought, that were Jesus was at the top of those stairs when Pontius Pilate said, "Behold the man." Right. So his blood is on those stairs. And all that. So she got them and brought them to Rome. But I remember that waiting room, and I thought, this is so weird. Later came to find out, and it makes sense to do exorcisms in a holy place. Right. Right. I've been involved in, I think, 24 full rite exorcisms, and always, of course, in a church, always in our case was with mass and all of that. But I can imagine if you wanted to pick a place in Rome, you would pick a very holy place. Right. And that's probably why it was there.
Right.
Very cool. So what's the big deal about Gabriele Amorth? I mean, he's by far the most well-known exorcist, I think. I think a couple others, like Father Ripperger more recently, but I think there are more books out about him and by him. Of course, there's this big movie just came out with Russell Crowe, right? That I'm hearing, I haven't seen it, I've heard it's got a lot of errors in it.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. But I think it was just that he was so prolific and so willing to speak on these topics. There's not, outside of scripture, outside of books here and there, there wasn't really any sort of definitive text on what exorcists do, what they're dealing with. And people need to know. I mean, it's one of the things that we talk about here. People need to know. People need to understand the reality of the enemy and how he attacks and how you can defend yourself and those sorts of things. And he spoke on that and he wrote on that. I mean, all of these books are basically questions and answers, especially the new one, The Pope's Exorcist. It's just like, here's a question, here's an answer. This is the reality. And you want to talk about an authority on this topic. I mean, if you've done 60,000 exorcisms, it's 10,000 hours makes you an expert.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So 60,000 exorcisms, some of them going over multiple hours. This guy wasn't just an expert. Whatever the level above expert is,
right?
That's where he's at.
It's interesting. You think people, I'm always a little blown away by people who blow off the wisdom of an exorcist.
It's very strange. Yeah.
I watched a video sometime recently about whether or not laity can cast out demons by a good human being that I have respect for, scholar in another area. But their argument was a little strange to me because they exorcists have often warned laity have to be careful.
Yeah.
Right. And
there's authority roles. And,
yeah. And I mean, I just saw a video recently with Adam Bly, who's a layman, but involved in this world for his diocese. And also he's even been a peritus or a witness. He's been allowed places where,
well, and he's been appointed to
priests,
a place from the church that
right,
says, hey, you help teach exorcists
yeah,
what they need to know.
Yeah. And I heard him talk about how somebody in one instance, one specific case, the layperson laid hands on a person to cast out a demon. They were possessed themselves.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. The person didn't have authority in that case.
Yeah.
They were laying on hands and they were using prayers improperly, which kind of goes into authority as well. But that combination of things ended up getting that person possessed. And I think if I remember the video correctly, you said that that person is still possessed to this day.
Yeah,
or
at
like
least
15 years,
according to his knowledge. Yeah, I heard the same thing.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is the comment was made, well, that's just opinion. And I thought that's like saying a surgeon who's done 10,000 surgeries, right, and maybe you've done 20,
right,
discounting that surgeon's
right,
experience as just opinion,
right,
is I thought it was egregiously arrogant and dangerous and prideful. I mean, I struck me as, wow, you just said that.
Yeah, I wish there was a, because there's the saying, the consensus of the theologians.
Yeah.
I want this saying to become more known. What's the consensus of exorcists?
Yeah. Right.
Because these are the guys who are on the front lines, who are dealing with this stuff face to face, who are getting knowledge in a different way that only a few people. So in your case, having assisted in full rite exorcisms multiple times, you have more knowledge than the average lay person, right? Like there's this structure of not necessarily authority, but expertise on the matter. And at the top of that structure is exorcists.
Right. Well, and particularly very experienced ones like Amorth,
right,
or Father Chad Ripperger.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that they become infallible suddenly, but it would be foolish to discard their advice. And I've heard a number of times, things that Father Amorth have said, and people go, Father Amorth said this, but I don't agree. I'm thinking, wow, who are you?
Right.
And when it comes to demons, I mean, I think part of the issue is that unless you experience what it's like to hear one, to see one, and I've had the unfortunate experience. A lot of people don't know that my mother was involved in the occult, and I was pretty tormented. I actually don't like talking about it, but I did actually see the demonic, and I did have to personally go through deliverance as a young Christian after I came to Christ. And then, of course, subsequently being involved in these exorcisms, hearing the voice of demons, I've described a number of times being lifted off the ground by someone who could barely walk, 3 guys at the same time. And I just think, I don't know, I think that kind of hubris comes when you have not seen or experienced some of those things, because you overestimate your authority, not Jesus' authority, because of course he can obliterate all the demons in a snap of the fingers, so to speak. But you overestimate your authority. Yes, we have power in the name of Jesus and by our baptism, but there's a distinction between power and authority that's often missed, that exorcists get, because they're trained and they understand, if I step out, I have a certain amount of power, but if I'm, as an example, if I'm not commissioned by the bishop, I don't have authority.
And the result is horrifically detrimental.
Horrifically
detrimental, not just to the exorcist, but to the person. So we're talking about exorcists who have to know these things. They have to know them at such a level that they don't make those mistakes, because if they do,
it's horrifying.
Yeah,
it's horrifying. I mean, what people suffer in exorcism, getting possessed, is the last thing you ever want to experience. I don't think I was possessed. I think I was oppressed.
Sure.
But what I experienced every night in my dreams, waking up screaming, remembering what I saw as a kid, I would call that, on a scale of 1 to 10 of severity, probably a 5 or a 6 for me. I probably a 4 now that I think about what I saw in actual exorcisms, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most severe, was like a 50.
Yeah.
It was, I'm like, and that's why I'm cautious. Adam, when we get back from the break, I want to talk about what Adam Bly said about the power of command prayers versus supplication prayers in this context. So we'll be right back. Just remember at the end of the show, you've got to grab that and say that.
If you want to do two, we can do two.
Huh?
Yeah, we'll get to that, I think.
Yeah.
If you want to do two, we can do two. I know Maggie's been asking, so we don't have to squeeze it all into one, but it's up to your schedule and whatever.
Okay, we'll kind of see how it rolls out. So before we jump back in, folks, remember SpiritualDirection.com /prayer, PRAYER, for a very expensive but free to you, high quality course.
Expensive to us.
Expensive to us.
Zero cost for you to view.
Zero cost for you on mental prayer. 5-part series. Was a 5-part, Debbie? Anyway, it's very SpiritualDirection.com /prayer. And then the upcoming summit, Avila Summit, Mary and Mystery and the Triumph of the Immaculate Heart, October 13th through the 15th. You can find both of those also on the events page at SpiritualDirection.com. All right, let's jump back into the show. And this one we have to do 12 minutes. On your mark, set 12.
30, I think.
So we did 13 the last one. So 12:30.
Yeah.
Okay. On your mark, set, go. Welcome back. This is Dan and Jordan Burke on Divine Intimacy Radio, talking about the Pope's exorcist, Father Gabriele Amorth. So I mentioned before the break that Adam Bly, who's an expert in this area, was talking about how laying out of hands can be dangerous. And Father Amorth, by the way, what did he say about laying out of hands?
Father Amorth?
Yes.
Well, I also want to note that Adam Bly's books are also sold by Sophia Press.
Okay.
Probably EWT and Religious Catalog and all that kind of stuff. But Adam Bly is phenomenal. So what's fascinating, I want to provide some context to this because this, I think, is really important. Father Amorth was a huge proponent of the charismatic renewal.
Right.
So keep that in mind.
Pro-charismatic. Father Ripperger is a little more critical.
Sure.
And Father Amorth wasn't.
He was very, very pro-charismatic renewal. He spoke very highly of them. So keep that in mind as you listen to this, talking about laying on of hands.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it is necessary to know that to do the prayers of liberation well, one must keep one's hands firm. At most, raising a hand toward the person for whom you are praying.
At most, like,
right.
So like almost like saying hi, or like you're gonna.
Right.
Yeah.
He says at most, but nothing more.
Nothing more.
I have preached to many groups of the renewal, and I've always spoken clearly regarding this. Then some go on to do whatever they wish because they are only exalting themselves. But he goes on further to give reasoning. So the question is basically, well, hold on, why is there directions? What are the directions? My recommendations for not imposing hands is this. At times there are persons who have some negativity, and in placing hands, they transmit that negativity, which goes to what we were talking about with Adam Bly and
the other person getting possessed.
Getting possessed.
When he speaks of transmit the negativity, they're talking about dark, demonic, spiritual influence.
Right.
Moving from one person to another through the exercise of an action that they don't have authority to exercise. He goes on to explain.
And that's what he goes on to here. Another reason, even stronger, is because it is a priestly gesture, and he can place his hands on the head of one he is guiding in prayer, but only he, and at the most on the head. Now he clarifies that, yes, of course, spouses can lay hands on one another and on their children, but he says very clearly, in prayer groups, I do not agree to it, because again, there can be someone who possesses a spell that transmits some negativity. And he's so adamant on this fact that he says, I was with various persons, all very spiritual, but they had their hands placed on a shoulder, which bothered me terribly. So he's again, this is a guy who's very pro charismatic renewal, very supportive of them, but also is very clear to say there are some, I've told them multiple times, don't do this, continue to do it. And it's interesting to me that he says it's because they are exalting themselves. So I don't know. There's a whole lot there,
and it's back to that same thing. And being repetitive is not always a great thing to do. But if you've had a surgeon who did 10,000 surgeries versus somebody who's got a cursory knowledge, I think you're kind of stupid not to listen to them. I think you're arrogant not to listen to. Right. If I could just be bold, and I don't really want to accuse anyone of that. I don't like that kind of talk. I don't like division in the church. I don't like being critical of other people.
Well, but in this case, that clarity and that boldness
can save somebody's soul.
Right, because of the potential of what could happen if people don't heed the words of somebody who actually knows what he's talking about.
So you're listening to Dan and Jordan Burke on Divine Intimacy Radio. We're talking about a new book from Sophia Institute Press called The Pope's Exorcist, 101 Questions about Father Gabriele Amorth. Now, out of curiosity, so Father Ripperger has a new book called Dominion, which I think is extraordinary work. And in it, he has what Amorth has done before Ripperger, and keep me on track with this, is in the early 19th century, exorcism started to go out of fashion because of modern psychology and scientism and just the arrogance of modernity. Like, we don't need that silly stuff anymore.
Right.
So a lot of wisdom was lost. And I've heard multiple exorcists talk about this. So Amorth came to prominence because he started to really compile that wisdom. He started that Institute of Exorcists, the association. And then, of course, more recently, Father Ripperger is doing that and compiled the work Dominion. Go ahead.
In my opinion, if you're going to compare it to anything, this is like, again, this is my opinion, the Summa of angelology and demonology. There's nothing out there like this.
Nothing is thorough. Nothing. And, you know, the thing about him that I appreciate is everything he does, he backs up with references to church tradition, that sort of thing. But he in particular makes a distinction between authority and power. And he notes that just because you have the power to cast out demons doesn't mean you have the authority to cast out demons. But regardless, did Amorth have that same kind of structured thought, or is we just seeing Ripperger developing it post Amorth, or did you see, because I know you've read every one of his books?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel as if Father Amorth has implied it. I can't think of anything where he talked about it explicitly. You know, there's a case again where he's talking about laying on of hands, and he says he has a caveat that says, well, in this case it was a son praying for his mother, so it was appropriate. So he doesn't outright say there's a structure of authority here, but it's implied with what he's saying. He's saying it's a mother and father. Well, what does that imply? Familial connection, authority structure, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Does he talk about lay deliverance and what the lay people can do?
Yeah. Well, what's fascinating is one of his first books, I think, is An Exorcist Tells His Tale. He laments the fact that there are not more people involved in this sort of ministry. But again, he's also very careful to say there are things that you can and can't do.
Yeah.
You know, there's a structure of authority for a reason. And I think it's probably, I don't recall any specific cases, but I would assume he had seen people step outside of that and get kind of caught up in.
Well, certainly the one with Adam Bly we talked about is a great example. So what's the most important wisdom for our time from Father Amorth, in your opinion, whether it's from the Pope's Exorcist or the other, Sophia texts that he's published through?
Well, so there's two things. I think I'll take it in two different directions. One is he was always saying, read the Gospels, read the Gospels, read the Gospels, right? What advice do you have for the priests? Read the Gospels. What advice do you have for some? Read the Gospels. Like, that's his advice. But on the side of exorcism, what's fascinating is that the number one way that people, in his experience, and Father Amorth's experience, the number one way that people became possessed was through a curse from somebody else.
Interesting.
And more often than not, that curse was from a family member. And he, in the book, relates a story about food that was cursed and ingested by another family member, and then that woman became possessed. So,
you know what I hate about that is, early on when I was learning about this, in my head, the only way you get possessed is if you want to be possessed, basically.
Right.
And what I hate about that is it's like getting shot. Somebody can decide they're going to do something against you, and they do it, and you suffer.
Right. But the reason I bring it up is because it is an example of being on guard and being aware and being sacramentally healthy and praying. Monsignor Rossetti, who we've had on multiple times, wrote in one of his blogs about praying over all of his food, because he was with a woman who has particular gifts, and she was like, Father, you need to pray over that.
Yeah.
So it's not a people shouldn't hear that and think, oh man, I'm going to get cursed.
Yeah.
It's like, no, just live a healthy sacramental life, seek God, pray, just do what the normative what's supposed to be the normative Catholic life is. And, you shouldn't have to worry. And that doesn't mean things won't happen, but you shouldn't have to,
Yeah. And I want to do some clarifying too on this show, just to make sure, I'm always surprised at how quickly and easily people misrepresent what's said, even real time, like when I'm doing Zoom meetings.
Oh, yeah.
It's like somebody says, you just said A. I'm like, wow, how did you get that? I didn't say anything of close.
Right.
We're not against the charismatic movement.
Oh, yeah.
We are not against lay deliverance. I've been involved in lay deliverance. We are not against any. In fact, we're very pro those who have given their lives to really helping other people to get free, especially those brave souls who entered into the space that was vacated by the bishops and is now, since John Paul II's request. By the way, didn't Amorth say something interesting about bishops who didn't appoint exorcists?
This is what got him some enemies, but he was very outspoken and said, if you're a bishop and you don't appoint an exorcist, you're in mortal sin.
So just to be clear, Jordan Burke didn't say that. That was Father Gabriele Amorth. So he said they're in mortal sin. Why would he say that? Just because of the suffering of the people?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you're that involved in liberation and helping people, you recognize the limitations that have been placed upon you by different factors, whether or not it's inside or outside the church, regardless. But you want to eliminate those factors. And I what I've gotten from reading all of his work is his heart was just set on liberating people and setting them free from their suffering.
Yeah. What do you think? I think some of the fear is my opinion, could be wrong, is that if I engage, I'm going to draw attention. And the fact is, that's like pretending you're not in a war,
right?
And going, and that you're not surrounded by enemies. If you don't engage, you're going to be weak and get picked off. You're going to be manipulated. If you engage, you actually get stronger. You repel the enemy. You give him less space. I mean, you engaging means what is hidden comes to the fore, but I don't know. I'd rather fight something I can see.
Yeah, I struggle a lot with that question because I want to shake people in a loving way and say, you're in the battle. You can't put your head in the sand.
Yeah.
I've said this ad nauseum. People are probably sick of hearing me say it, but Catechism of the Council of Trent has a section called Audacity of Demons. This is a council.
Yeah.
And it says the war with them will not end. Their hatred against us is enormous. There can be no peace. There can be no truce.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the council. What about the Gospels? The Gospels make it clear. The devil, 1 Peter 5:8, devil prowls about like a roaring lion.
And that's an epistle, not the gospel.
But
thank you. Yeah,
you're right. Yeah. I'm getting worked up now.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? It's like, don't put your head in the sand. I'm like you. I want to see who's trying to harm me so I can at least defend myself.
Yeah.
If the idea that we can sit and, if I don't do anything, nothing's going to happen. It's like, well, guess what? That's exactly what the enemy wants, because you're not going to progress.
And you're going to get weak. And that's the issue. You're going to get weak and you're going to be easily manipulated. Right. And, it's also likely to take you to hell because you're not awake. You're not fighting. You're not defending yourself. So the Pope's Exorcist, 101 questions about Father Gabriele Amorth, Sophia Press. I'm sure it's carried at EWTN's religious catalog, as are all good books. Thanks for coming on the show and helping on the front end. You're always on the back end, behind the scenes, helping us to produce it. But folks, if you want to learn more as well on this topic, go to SpiritualDirection.com. We have thousands of articles on the interior life, videos, maybe even thousands of videos by now.
Yeah.
And we'll help you grow in your faith.
Yep. Until next time, may the God of peace make you perfect in holiness. May he preserve you whole in entire spirit, soul, and body, irreproachable at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.